so far. No. Yes. I, well, she's just through. Yeah, tomorrow is virtual. No, Monday's off, and then Tuesday's virtual, and then they're not sure what. Good morning. Good morning. Well, I was hoping we'd get a few more people, but that's okay. Well, good morning, Cross Tower. Glad we can all be here today, and those who are online joining us today. Are we live? Great. Okay. Just want to welcome everyone here today, and again, those who are joining us online. Just a quick reminder, preaching to the choir, but we're still under some COVID restrictions. We want to make sure everyone's just aware to keep your distance if you can, please. If you feel comfortable with masks, please wear masks. Just keep distancing. Hopefully we'll get through this fairly quickly. So I guess we've had had some good news out of New York that maybe their numbers are peaking, so that's good. Hopefully it'll start across the country. But anyway, I figured our numbers might be down a little bit this morning, which they are, but they might pick up here a little bit. So we're on the second class of integrity. It's kind of interesting because this really isn't a biblical word in a sense. You don't see it too much of just saying, yes, it's in there a little bit, but it's not like a love, joy, peace, patience. It's not we don't hear it too much, but yet it affects our lives every day, and we don't maybe even understand it. But I wanted just to give a quick little recap last week, since it's just so to kind of bring us up to speed here. We started last week. I asked you a question: do you know anyone who has ever done the right thing and paid a price as a result of it? Or have you ever done the right thing? And when I say the right thing, what is perfect, what is good, and then you know that you're going to end up paying a price for it. It's one of those things that it's a little strange sometimes, but and then I asked how we defined integrity, because again, it's not a common word that we use. We always hear the term like, well, he's a man of integrity. But what does that mean? And this whole sermon series actually is called "Your Integrity, Our World," because your integrity affects our world. I always hear this thing like, well, as long as they do it and it doesn't hurt anybody. Well, no, integrity. If you don't have integrity, it will end up hurting somebody. And this series actually is by Andy Stanley. I have to give him full credit because I stole everything from him on it. So I don't want to plagiarize him that I actually came up with this. But it's a sermon series. I've just turned it into a class series, so it's a little bit difficult. But if you have any thoughts or anything that you want to bring forward, please do during the class. Just let me know. We do, since we are live, we have a microphone, or we might have Mike here with a microphone that we usually raise your hand so we can kind of pass it around, and so the people online can actually hear as well. So again, how you define integrity. I liked how Andy Stanley defined integrity. He says, integrity is the resolve and the courage to do what is right and noble, just because it's the right and noble thing to do. Even when it doesn't benefit you. The right thing is not always when it benefits us, right? A lot of times we think, well, I'll find a way around it benefits me. And especially if it costs you something. Whether it's something at work, whether it's well, should I tell the truth on this matter, even though it might end up putting me back a couple steps, whatever, that's true integrity. So we're going to see how this actually works with us, our everyday lives, and how it is, to me, intertwined throughout the whole Bible. Steve, did you have your?
Yeah, I think I did.
Okay.
I get that it's still integrity when it's to your benefit, but boy, it's not very hard to have integrity when it benefits you. I'm not even sure that really is integrity. You want, because maybe it is, maybe you're acting with integrity, but it would be difficult for somebody outside of you to understand your motives, because you're saying that these things could be, I'm good, this is the right thing to do, which is also the right thing for me. But so it's a completely different dynamic when you say, okay, I'm going to do the right thing, but doing this right thing may not be the thing that's most beneficial or most expedient for me today. And that's when I really am not that big a fan of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it when people are having integrity and it's to my benefit.
Right.
But when it's causing me some kind of difficulty or hardship, I am not such a fan.
And that's exactly what we're going to kind of touch on here today. Is that whole thing is why do we have a difficulty with this? What is it that causes us such pain sometimes? Because like I said, we have personal integrity, but yet we also require integrity of other people, don't we? So that's something that's kind of important. So we started just again to try to get through last week. We also then real quickly looked at structural integrity, and maybe we've all understood what this is. We all know that the ability of a structure to withstand its intended load without failure due to fracture and fatigue. And we talked about a couple of instances where either buildings or bridges or something has fallen, or you may have had something. All it takes is one beam to have a problem, and the load gets put out on everything. In fact, when a load-bearing structure fails, the load is transferred to and potentially overloads surrounding support structures. You know, this is a common thing in buildings. We see it even today. You'd think that we could design buildings that never fall apart. Like well, yeah, you could if you designed in enough structures integrity in each one of the beams, but then the cost just goes skyrocketing. So you know there has to be kind of a even line there. So. So anyway, you know, and then we kind of came to this point there, you know, not only is it structural integrity, we see it in structure, but the same thing affects us as well, doesn't it? A failure of personal integrity adds stress to the persons around us. It just is the way it is.
Well, the last thing you said, it just got me thinking when you're talking about structural integrity, that we can increase the structural integrity, but it comes at a cost, and that we have to balance that. So when we start talking about spiritual integrity, then at some point we can increase spiritual integrity, but it's just like it still comes at a cost, but we're not always willing to pay that. Everybody else is always willing to pay that cost. I'm not always willing to pay that cost.
Well, I can tell you, everyone else is not willing to pay that cost either, but you know, you're exactly right. You know. So again, this is kind of where we're leading is, you know, as how does integrity affect us? Not only we see it, you know, in nature, in everything around us, but yet we see it with ourselves as well. And, you know, a failure of our personal integrity will always affect people around us. A personal failure of integrity from anybody, no matter, and this is a nice thing, no matter how old you are or how young you are, it's not different whether you're a child or an old person. It's still the exact same thing. But you transfer that stress to the people around you, and a lot of times it's part of your family. Your family is where that stress actually happens. You know, we talked just a little bit about, you know, the teachers in school. You see this, you've seen it at school. You know, you see this great straight A student or a high B student, and all of a sudden their grades start dropping, and you know things are starting to look. And the first thing that comes to your mind is, you know, what's going on with them at home? You know, what in the world's going on with this kid? There's something that's causing this stress. So with regards to our personal integrity, we, you know, and this goes back to your, Steve, you know, to my own personal integrity, a lot of times we look for, you know, loopholes or ways around it, or you don't want to tell the whole story, or, you know, you don't want to be transparent. You don't want to be completely honest because, you know, it's going to affect your integrity, you know. But you live with it. But you find a way, you know, that you can live with it. You know, the thing is that's on your personal, but here's the thing is, you expect integrity from the people closest to you, all around you, every day. You may give yourself a little okay, but you still expect it from everyone around you, don't you? We like we said last week, we expect it from our leaders, don't we? We expect Randy to be telling the truth up here, don't we? All the time, be a man of integrity. Don't we expect it from our co-workers, from our bosses, from, you know, maybe even our politicians? We expect it, but Mark.
I heard on the news this morning that the University of Michigan fired their president because he had an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. And the university said, we have to maintain the integrity of the institution. And so that was one of the reasons that they used to say it does affect us and what we're trying to do internally and how we're seeing other places. And if we're going to say one thing, we got to be willing to act on it.
You're exactly right. That was another point I brought up last week. You know, we see this in businesses. You know, this is taking Fortune 500 companies down. You know, hundreds of people have lost their jobs, or you know, affects a college. You know, that's going to leave a stigma there, and you know, it's something that affects us every day. It's part of us every day. That we're going to see a little bit more is, where does that come from? Where does that come from? So this kind of brings us about to where we ended last week. So now we're kind of caught up. And we ended with this. The load's always transferred. Always transferred. It's never, you know, if you have a breach of your personal integrity, it doesn't stay with you. It's always transferred to something. You know, like I said, we know this from our families. We know this from our work. If something's going on, it affects everyone around us. So integrity assumes an ought to. We readily appeal to, that we assume everybody around us is accountable to. Right? I'll say that again. Integrity assumes an ought to. You ought to know what to do. What, you know? And then we readily appeal to, well, how come they didn't do that? They know what they should have done. And it's everybody that we assume that everybody around us is accountable to. Duh, don't we all know this? Right? Have you ever said this to someone? You lied to me. You lied to me, yeah? You know, it's implying that, lying is wrong, right? Well, but you could say, well, yeah, but we've never discussed the pros and cons of lying, right? I just assumed that you know this, you're not supposed to lie, when you go for a job interview and you sit down, you don't usually say, well, wait, hold on a second. Let's discuss what's right and what's wrong so that we can both be on the same page so I know not what to lie or you don't. Let's just, do we do that? When you go on your first date or whatever, you don't sit down with them, hold on a second, let's discuss this now. What is right and what's wrong? What's good, what's bad? Let's get this all out in the open so we both know what we're thinking, right? We don't do that, do we? You don't do that before you sign a contract. You don't do that before you enter a relationship with someone. But it's odd because we just assume that people know what they ought to do and what they ought not to do, right? We just assume that. Now, I didn't decide lying was wrong. You didn't decide lying was wrong. But where did it come from? We just know that it's wrong. Is that all that there is? Well, we just know that it's wrong. I hope you never heard this, and this is something that I don't suggest that you say to anyone as well, but here's something hopefully that you have rarely heard. Yes, I lied to you. So what? So what? Why are you making such a big deal out of this, It's it just wouldn't it just hit us when we hear it? And I'm sure some of us maybe have heard that. It's a way to get out of something. So what? So I lied to you, big deal, But if there's no objective outside of us, if there's no sense of right or wrong, then we just seem to make excuses for our behavior. Is that what we do?
Jeff, that reminds me of years ago, John Madden was interviewed about how the Raiders were they played dirty, and his response was, "Yeah, we played dirty. So what are you going to do about it?"
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, lots of this sort of things we see in movies and we hear about it, but it still catches a cog in us. Yes.
Along with, yes, I lied to you, so what? Recently, probably within the last month or so, someone's behavior was described to us as, well, that's just who they are. They exaggerate the truth. They have some, problems with their, feeling how they feel about themselves, but, that's just who they are. And my response to that person was, yeah, but they lied. That's a lie. And sometimes we excuse people's behavior as that's just who they are, and we just need to accept that about them, but that's a lie.
Yeah. Well, again, I think in today's society we maybe see that trying to get more and more to just making sure that everything's okay. It just doesn't really matter. Everything must be okay, and we have to accept everything.
Everybody today has their own truth, too.
Well, yeah, exactly. What is, and what are they basing it off of?
What's going on in their head? Me.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Got Ron back here with a thought.
I've said this before, and you may have heard it from me, but there was a time when I believed there was right and wrong. If you said, "Are you having a good day?" and you said yes when you really weren't, that was a lie. And then as time went on, being in society, you start to learn that maybe that's not the best thing to say, and then there becomes this shade of gray where you can say, "Yeah, I had a nice day," and not worry about it. Pretty soon, that shade of gray and that line becomes wider and wider, and this actually is I'm saying this is me.
Mm-hmm.
Get wider and wider pretty soon almost anything can be justified as not a lie. You know, I'm just being whatever. And when I really started to realize that that was wrong, that all came back to that first original, do I cross this line even as much as am I having a nice day? And that, I think, is what you're talking about. We need to know where that,
Yep, that's
and
true.
the integrity of what we're saying.
True, true. You know, what we're most likely to hear is, instead of, yes, I'd like to, is, what? I didn't lie to you. That's what we hear mostly from our kids, especially, what? I didn't lie to you. Well, implying that lying is wrong, right? I didn't lie. So it's interesting because we lie about lying so people don't think that we're lying, right? We lie about lying so that people don't think that we're lying, right? What you might hear on the other hand is this. Well, the reason why I lied is, fill in the blank. But why not just decide that lying isn't wrong? Like we say, why don't we just, that's the way it is now. Well, if they want to lie, then there must be something okay with it. Just go ahead and let them lie, right? Then we wouldn't have to make excuses. We wouldn't have to say, yeah, I lied. I cheated. I was unfaithful. So what? What are we even talking about this for? Are we holding ourselves and others to a standard that is just made up? Is integrity something we just made up? No. It's actually an inescapable truth. And again, this is right from Andy. This is good. There's an ought to that stands outside of you and over you that didn't originate with you. There's an ought to that stands outside of you and over you that didn't originate with you. You ought to know better. We know better. You ought to know better. Right? Now again, I didn't decide lying was wrong, and you didn't decide lying was wrong, but everyone just knows that it's wrong, right? Now I hope that you've never heard this, and I don't suggest that you say this to anyone, but hopefully you have rarely heard this, but that's not exactly the slide I wanted, but maybe hold it. Did I go on the wrong page? There we go. If there is no ought to that stands outside of you and holds sway over you, then what is there? Some people might say, no, there isn't. There's nothing. We can just make this stuff up. If there is no ought to that stands outside of you and holds sway over you, then what is there? Why do we have such a problem with that? Then here's what happens. We just say integrity is merely a tool to use to get our way, right? We use it when we want to, until it gets in the way, and then we just throw it away, right? Is that what integrity is? Is it just a tool? It's interesting because Andy here kind of took it in a little bit of a different direction, and I think I brought this up last week. But how many of you here think it's that women have the right to vote, or should have the right to vote? Huh? But there was a time when that wasn't the case. The majority said no, and then it was the other way. Is that what it is? Is we just use it when we want to use it, or when it fits into, that way, governments can change things, and we can, but we actually change in integrity, or we're actually trying to get rid of it? Is integrity merely a tool that we use to get our way? We hope that it's not, huh? Now, the good news is, the moment we attempt to justify our behavior in our minds, we leave here, I know what I shouldn't do, but I was going to do this. I know I shouldn't do it. The moment we attempt to justify a behavior in our minds, we acknowledge the divine. And that's what we're going to be actually leading to here today. We're going to see a couple of verses. Again, we've all dismissed or denied the existence of ought to sometime in our lives. Why? From our actions. because we don't always do what we ought to do, right? In fact, what I want to look at now is, Steve, you got your Bible open, and you know this. We want to go to the do-do passage in Romans 7:15 through 23. Because we're going to see here, I don't know how many of us would ever think that Paul would not be a man of integrity. But you know what? This passage, I've never really read it this way, but you know what? He's struggling with his integrity here in this passage. So, 7:15 through 23.
Okay, here we go. Romans 7:15. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, and it is the sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep doing. Now, if you do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me.
Can you see how Paul had a trouble with this? He was struggling with what to do, what not to do. Struggling with his integrity. There's something that we do, which it kind of made me feel good when I read that verse to say, yeah, you know what? Paul actually, he's just like us. And we all have a problem with what do we do? Do we know what we ought, why don't we do what we know we ought to do? Sometimes it's amazing. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, he says, I just read 21, I don't know if it'll be 23,
It's okay.
but Paul says, when I want to, even when I'm really focused and I want to do good, I know that evil is right there with me. And Jesus tells the Jews in John chapter 8, he says, look, you're just like your daddy, and your daddy is a liar, and he is the father of lies, and that's Satan. And he says he was a murderer from the beginning, and all he wants to do is tell lies. And when we were talking about this a few minutes back, I was just thinking, who ever listens to, if anyone, twice, we have some struggles at work right now. And twice this last week, I was called a liar by some people that are supposed to be friends of mine. And I don't think there's anybody who ever is proud that they've been called a liar.
No, it's
a great statement. Yeah, guess what happened to me today? I did something really good. I got called a liar. Well, it just automatically, I think puts us on the defensive. It sets us off. Nobody wants to be called a liar. And of course, that's the same effect that it had on the Jews when Jesus talked to them in John chapter 8, and he says that you're liars and that that you got a bad father, and they say their father's Abraham. So it starts a whole thing going on there. But that's the same thing that's with us. When people call us liars, we're not happy about it. But that's really not just in lying, but it's in a life of integrity. That's what Paul says. I set up this morning, I know that sin's out there, but today I'm going to live an entire 24 hours without sin. And then he gets to like the next 45 seconds, and he's already blown it, and he says, why can't I do what it is that I want to do?
Adam over when he gets there, but you're exactly right, Steve. A lot of times we don't want to do the right thing because we don't want someone to call us something that we know is wrong, but we don't want to be called it anyway. Even though we know we're right, we don't want to be called a liar. So okay, I'll bend this a little bit here because I don't want to be called a liar, even though what you're doing is perfectly truthful. That's the cost. That's the cost of, our integrity. We should do, that's true integrity, is where you do it, even though it cost us. Adam.
Just to add to what Steve was saying, I really like that verse, that whenever I want to do good, evil is right there with me. Like in a court of law, or even just with us in general, credibility. If you can get someone to question, if you can try to question someone's credibility, then that means you can ignore every good thing that they have ever done or said. You know, and again, it's a matter of getting your way. So I mean, the devil. I mean, evil. This is how evil works. They want to put that seed in the mind, the seed of doubt, the seed of, the devil knows exactly what our desires are. He knows how to get to us. And, I mean, we have plenty of examples in the Bible to where Old Testament, important people made mistakes. New Testament, important people made mistakes. But this is where we're supposed to have this spirit and nature of love and forgiveness. And the devil really doesn't want that. He wants us to be, he wants us looking at questioning people's credibility and trying to go after our own way and look to our own interests. Instead, it's supposed to be, hey, we know that this life is hard. We have our desires. Let's look at each other with love and also with forgiveness, but also hold people to what God calls us to be.
Yep. Well, like Steve's kind of example, was exactly right. I mean, we all struggle with integrity ourselves, but and we know that there's an ought to, right? We just know that it's there. We know it's there. But it's interesting because we never have a problem with our reactions to an ought to, right? We react to ought to whenever someone doesn't do what they ought to do, and it hurts us or hurts someone around us. Well, they knew better. Well, you know better. We'll get on them about, well, you know better. But ourselves, we'll dismiss it sometimes and like, well, I know what I ought to do, but when it comes to our reaction with other people, isn't it amazing how we expect other people to be truthful and to have integrity? Yeah. Quite interesting. So what does this all have to do with integrity? Actually, that's what and then the slide back there says, if there's an ought to that stands outside of you and holds sway over you, then it's very, very powerful. And let's see. No, my slides got messed up. I'm sorry. But if there's an ought to that stands outside of you and holds sway over you, then it's very, very powerful.
Jeff,
Mike,
to this slide, it brings us to the point that we all should be working from the same standard. Tracy just referenced, well, that's not my truth. The truth is the truth. That may not be my experience. That may not be my perspective, but the truth is the truth. There is only the truth, not my truth. Many years ago, but I'm sure it still goes on today, we just don't hear about it. There was a space mission, I think it was one of the Mars rovers, that was a failure because they didn't work to the same standard. One was working in metric, the other was working in British English units. Mm-hmm. And so you're immediately off between centimeters and inches by 2.5. So it was not just a little bit of a problem. The point is we need to be working from the truth, not our truth.
Right. Right. Well, this is interesting because, again, the reality is that we wrestle with this every single day, whether it's our integrity or whether it's what we expect integrity from other people. So we determine. So in determining what a foundation is there a foundation of integrity? Is there an anchor? And all of this has huge ramifications. Because if integrity is not connected to anything, if it's not supported or grounded in anything, then it doesn't exist other than what our opinion is, other than what we choose, when and how we choose that integrity wants to be used, right? But if it's grounded in the divine, then integrity is truly what is right. It helps us to know what is wrong. It helps us to know what we ought to do. It helps us to know what is virtuous, what is noble. Then it can't be redefined by public opinion or government rule or fill in the blank. We've got to make sure that integrity is, like Mike said, it's the truth. It is the truth, and we need to stand by that truth. And the question then is, well, if it is, where did it come from? If it is part of the this is kind of one of those things where you just, how do you know that there's a God? Well, here's something, because this is something that is almost so powerful. I want to read out of Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, and this is where they're talking about how Christ is the sacrifice once for all. And the laws of the Jewish people, they were written down. They followed them. They added to them. They made sure that everyone followed these laws. And you had to be part of this total law system here. And us Gentiles, we weren't part of that. We didn't have that. So for eons of years, they really relied on the law. And here they're talking about, it didn't, even though that happened, even though the priests and followed these all the time, it still didn't do what it was supposed to do. And Christ came. The sacrifice that Christ came was once for all. And starting in verse, even like in verse 11, it says, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sin. And then we go down to verse 16 or verse 15. It says, for by one sacrifice Christ made perfect everything, made holy. The Holy Spirit also testifies this in verse 15 about us. First he says, this is the covenant I will make with them. After that time, says the Lord, I will put my laws in their hearts, and I will write them on their minds. Why do we know integrity? Why do we know that it's there? Why do we know the difference between right and wrong? Because God wrote them on our hearts, and God wrote them on our minds. It's one of those things that to me is like, okay, there's that light bulb thing, Is there, when someone says, oh, it really isn't a God. Well, then explain this, Why do you have that there? It's because it was written on our hearts and written on our minds. That we will always know what is right. We will always know that. We will always know what is wrong. And whether it's for ourselves or whether it's for other people. And the moment we attempt to justify behavior in our minds, like we said here, the moment we attempt it, we're acknowledging the divine. We're acknowledging God and how powerful he is. Good old Paul goes on. This is kind of another thing that just kind of, again, this slide, this verse, when I read it before, and I read it now, I'm like, wow, it just kind of makes so much more sense. So this is out of Romans 2, 14 and 15. Paul writes, indeed, when the Gentiles who do not have the law, and this is the law we're talking about, he's talking to the Jewish people here and saying, even when these guys who don't have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves. Even though they do not have the law, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. If that's not integrity, I don't know what is. If that's not what's written on our hearts, that we don't have to have the written law. We've got it written on our hearts and our minds. How much more powerful does it need to be?
The point should be made, though, that even Paul did what he did in persecuting the Christians out of good conscience. But as soon as he learned the truth, as soon as he was met on the road to Damascus, he educated his conscience. So we may be wrong in our understanding. We may be working from our truth, not the truth. We always need to be open to that. So that's a point to be made here, that their consciences also bearing witnesses. There are some foundational, absolute truths that we know instinctively. We know that we don't abuse other people. But
But we do.
there are other ways that through maturity we do learn and educate our consciences.
Right. Well, again, all of this is great to understand this, and I think the point that Andy was trying to get to here is to know that this is a godly thing. This isn't just something that we've made up, that is part of who we are. Ron.
Well, just commenting on what I said earlier and what Mike just said, it occurred to me that I know some people that are like this, very good friend of mine, but I also know some people that what I said before is if somebody asks you if you had a nice day and you say yes, and you know for sure that it's been a miserable day, you can start to justify what you said as not really being a lie. So if you look at what Mike said and said, okay, what is true, okay, the day was beautiful, but I know at least two people that have learned to never say, I'm having a good day when I'm not. One was Delmar from Orem, who never ever said anything other than, can't complain, nobody will listen. And another guy who would say, pretty good for a guy my age. So he never said something that was contrary to. So I think what Mike said kind of crystallized that is if you realize that what you're saying isn't true, the Lord can give you some revelations about how you might rephrase that.
The moment we attempt to justify behavior in our minds, we acknowledge that the law of God is written in our hearts, is how Andy put it, which kind of takes that last section there. In fact, it was interesting because they said, well, you know, that last thing out of Romans that Paul said really sums up. That's exactly what he wants to get to the point. He said, this is really all I want to say, but you know, I got 45 minutes to talk, so I needed just to fill it in with something else. But that's the most important thing we need to remember, that the moment we attempt to justify behavior in our minds, yeah, I know I ought to do that, but I'm going to do this. I know what's right, but I'm going to do this. We acknowledge the law of God written on our hearts. I like how Andy kind of closed it out in his sermon like this. He said, the rule of God, the kingdom of God, is more than we can imagine. Everyone should consider following Jesus because Jesus came to the earth and he came here and he ignited and he launched the rule of God on earth. And he placed his laws in our hearts and in our minds. So when you do the right thing, when you do the costly thing, and know that your life might be different because of it, Steve, when you do the right thing and costly thing, and your life might be different because of it, you have intersected with the divine at that point. You've acknowledged God. So he said, I hope you come away with an understanding that our integrity is anchored to something beyond our fluid opinions, beyond what, well, this is what I think, whatever. It's informed by a value system that stands outside of us, that stands over us, that puts pressure on us, and it represents what is best for us, what's totally best for us. And the reason that you know it's best for you is because when someone treats you the way that they ought not treat you, you appeal to the law of God every time. And hopefully that you'll appeal to the law of God in their hearts as well. So that ends our lesson 1 in week 2. So we'll continue on here next week. Any closing thoughts or comments? Mark?
If you were to look at Job 2:8, this is when Satan said, well, let me do something bad to Job, because he took away his riches, he took away his children and so forth, and he gave him severe boils. And it said, then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it, and he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble. In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. And so we talk about the patience of Job, but the real story is the integrity of Job and how he was going to relate to God. He had a lot of questions, he got angry and so forth, but he kept coming back to saying, God's in control, I got to trust him, I'm not going to curse God, I can question him, but I'm going to live in that relationship, and that's how I maintain my integrity.
Yep. And I think maybe, it's been heard that Job was known as a man of integrity, and that's where that saying may have came from. But it is, and if we can learn something from that, if we can glean a little something and take that away, that'd be something very powerful. Mike.
We were talking about, the sin is in us too. We have Jesus Christ in us, but we're born in the flesh. And one of the things I do struggle with all the time is my hands do what I don't want them to do. My tongue does what I don't want to. I hurt the ones I love the most. And it's almost like, Jesus, I love you. I know you saved me, but here I'm going to grab this nail and this hammer and just forgive me again. And I'm like pounding them. And it beats me up. And that's where the sin comes in, the lie, the devil, and it tries to hold that negative in our lives. And when we get swamped in the negative, well, it's all downhill from there. But we have that hope that we have to find the positive. We have to turn that cup half full, or even if a cup is in the mud and cracked, you still got a cup, you can fill it again. And when you focus on that and not let the lies, I got a long way to go with it, but I know it to be true. I've had enough experience where I've seen it. Life does get better. Your integrity grows when you keep the positives, because the negative is everywhere. We are in a world that is very negative. It's hard to understand. We can't comprehend it almost.
Yep.
But we got to trust. Our God is good, he's love, and he knows what he's doing. And it's hard to do, especially someone like me where I'm just can't seem. He says, sin no more. I'm like, did Mary Magdalene not sin anymore? Things like that. It's tough. I don't know. But I know that when we focus on the positive and you keep going to these things that sharpen the swords and things like this,
Yep.
It does.
Excellent. You're right, Mike. It's something that we're not going to master, that's for sure. It's that's why we have Jesus. It's why we have grace, obviously. Well, great. Let's go ahead and have a quick closing prayer, and then we'll be done. Dear wonderful God, again, we just want to come before you this day and thank you for your blessings that you pour out so freely. We thank you so much for your grace, for your love, for your caring, for the opportunity we have to come here and to focus a little bit more on your goodness and on your glory, and to study some important things that affects our lives, dear Father. And we just ask that you continue to teach us, continue to give us the wisdom and knowledge and understanding we need, dear Father, to do what is right, to do what the right and honorable thing is to do. Dear Father, again, be with us the rest of this day, be with our thoughts, and help your Spirit to lead and guide us through this day, and give us your peace, especially, dear Father. Help us to have a good time of worshiping you corporately today. That's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.